The youth of today will likely grow up with nostalgia for the eternal battle between Sony and Microsoft, or Apple and Epic. For the kids of yesteryear, though, that's our way of politely reminding you that you are old, the phrase console war referred mainly to Nintendo and Sega. Neither company is especially warlike today. Nintendo is charting its own territory and Sega still exists, which itself is kind of a victory. They've settled on developing and publishing games, being perennially kept afloat by the likes of Yakuza, Football Manager, Total War, and we'll get onto that in good time. So why exactly is Nintendo still around to Nintendo it up, while Sega has been barred from creating another console for the rest of eternity? Well, it honestly comes down less to Nintendo winning the war than it does Sega making so many horrific decisions that they caused themselves to lose it. Today, we are going to look at just a few. Are you ready? Let's look at some. I'm Ben from TripleJump, and here are the 10 worst decisions Sega ever made. Number 10. Terrible movie tie-ins. Hulk, Iron Man 2, The Golden Compass, Charlotte's Web, Aliens, Colonial Marines, Captain America, Super Soldier, Thor, God of Thunder, Aliens vs. Predator, The Incredibles, Rise of the Underminer. Yeah, Sega's ineptitude as a publisher of movie tie-ins probably doesn't get talked about enough. While the likes of Acclaim, THQ, and LJN are often considered the worst in this regard, we shouldn't overlook Sega's contribution to the lineage of crap film games. It's been discussed before, but surely a movie tie-in is the easiest type of game to make, right? You've got an established fan base, complete with concept design and a story to base it on. Marvel games especially should be an easy win. Superheroes must be among the easiest characters to base a game around, so why did Sega publish so many bad ones in the late 2000s? Why was Sega willing to soil its own good name by hitching it to products that it must have known were terrible? It was likely just a way to make a quick buck in the post-DREAMCAST years, but it has undoubtedly harmed their credibility in the long run. Not that they needed any help with that when you consider another certain franchise. No, again, we will get to that in good time. Number 9. No DVD player on the Dreamcast. It may sound strange today, but at the turn of the century, a built-in DVD player was a massive selling point. DVDs were the new thing, swooping in to replace the trusty old VHS, which by that point had been ruling the home video roost for nigh on 2 decades. The problem was, if you were to have a games console and a DVD player and a VHS player all under your TV, your living room was going to start to look like a Google Cloud storage center. For some reason, even though DVDs were the hot new thing, only one company thought to include a player in their new console. Nintendo went with odd mini-discs for the GameCube, the original Xbox required additional hardware, and the Sega Dreamcast opted to go with the GD-ROM disc format rather than the DVD-ROM. Not a great move. Now, I am not saying that the sole reason that Sony comfortably won the 6th generation and forced Sega out of the console market was that the PS2 could play DVDs, but you've got to think that a fair few people may have gone the Dreamcast's way if it had one too. Number 8. The Mega CD. The Mega CD wasn't a terrible idea, it was just executed badly. Optical discs were indeed destined to become the standard for video game distribution, and Sega got in on the ground floor. Sega, being Sega, also made sure to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. As we're seeing with the likes of virtual reality and cloud gaming today, new technology takes time before it efficiently reaches the mainstream consumer. Sega decided that was nonsense, and customers would be ready when Sega said they were ready. In 1991, they created an add-on for the Mega Drive called the Mega CD, or Sega CD if you want to get North American about this. It was the first console to use CD-ROM technology. The 3DO followed in 1993, and the PlayStation appeared in 1994 to actually do it properly. The problem was that the tech was still very expensive to both make and therefore sell. If you account for inflation, it was more expensive than the PlayStation 5 today. Yeah. This contributed to poor sales and a lack of interest that was not helped at all by a vastly underwhelming game library. It's tough to convince people that discs are the wave of the future when you're still releasing the only games worth playing on cartridges. Number 7. Going too big, too quickly. The Mega CD was not the only time Sega repeatedly attempted to be at the forefront of technology. There are plenty more examples of Sega jumping the gun and disappointing everyone. For instance, Sega went too far with the Saturn's powerhouse technology in an attempt to one-up Sony's upcoming PlayStation, resulting in a high price that put people off. They also tried to push online multiplayer and an online service with the Dreamcast's SegaNet years before Microsoft's Xbox Live. Predictably, it was expensive, dial-up internet wasn't wasn't reliable enough to support it, and it failed. These were undoubtedly innovative ideas, and they would eventually go on to define the ways in which games are played, but Sega seemed dead set on embracing technology that the public was neither ready nor able to accept. Just because it's a good idea doesn't mean it's the right time for that idea. If that were the case, those rocket boots I doodled in school would have existed and killed me long ago. Number 6. Rushing the Saturn to launch. As much as this title sounds like a headline you'd read about SpaceX, this is Sega we're talking about. Their founder's name doesn't rhyme with Felon Tusk, and their launches generally have far less careful planning. This was proved, without any doubt, in May of 1995. The Saturn had already been available in Japan since the end of 1994, with a US release of SATURN Day, September 2nd, 1995. And for once, Saturn Day isn't one of my own terrible puns, that's a terrible pun directly from Sega. However, Sony's PlayStation was set to hit the land of patriotism on September the 9th. That was later than the Saturn, but not later enough, so Sega decided to bring the Saturn forward, without, doing any of the stuff that would probably require. At the very first E3 on May the 11th, 1995, Sega's CEO surprise announced that the Saturn would launch that same day and that shops were already stocked. This surprised just about everyone, especially the shops themselves, who were in no way prepared. The move resulted in massive shortages, certain retailers dropping the Saturn completely, and the console launching with a pathetic lineup, as most of the games wouldn't release until the console's original planned launch date 4 months later. Thinking about it though, I'd better not insult the Saturn too much in case I incur the wrath of Segata. Number 5. The Night Trap controversy. Let's be honest, there's nothing malicious in Night Trap. It may not have been very good, but it's not the devil in disc format that politicians of the 90s claimed it to be. Still, the infamous Night Trap hearing did irreparable damage to Sega in North America. Despite admitting to never actually playing or even seeing the game themselves, in a hearing on December the 9th, 1993, politicians argued that the FMV game Night Trap was morally abhorrent. Sega at the time was trying to be edgy and cool, but the unwelcome press that Night Trap brought made panicky parents avoid Sega for the sake of their kids. Sega's perceived edginess earned the Mega Drive a sales win early on, but Night Trap was the point at which the strategy started to backfire. Oh, and we can't forget that Night Trap was on the Mega CD of all platforms, becoming yet another reason that it failed. That list just keeps on getting longer, doesn't it? Number 4. The 32X. The 32X was marketed as a cheaper entry into the 32-bit era. Now, as we know, upgraded versions of aging consoles can be a good thing. The PS4 Pro and Xbox One X, for example, gave your games a performance boost if you were that way inclined. The timing of those upgrades made sense too. The Xbox One launched in 2013, the One X in 2017, and the Xbox Series X/Series S in 2020. That's a good few years between them. Sensible. I think you can see where this is going. The Sega Mega Drive launched in Japan in 1988, the 32X in 1994, and its follow-up console, the Saturn, released in Japan 1 day later. This was less sensible. The 32X did not sell well, largely because everyone was moving on to the next generation and couldn't care less about it. What's more, it was still far too expensive to compete. Its existence told consumers that the upcoming Saturn was pointless because this chunky block could do the same thing. And Sega couldn't persuade developers to make games for the 32X as they were all focusing on the next generation, which, I hasten to remind you, began 1 day later. Poor timing is supposed to be an accident, Sega, not a strategy. Number 3. Focusing on hardware over games. To put it bluntly, Sega had a lot going on around the time of the Mega Drive. For that one console, Sega made a veritable wave of misguided peripherals. There was the terrible 6-button remote arcade pad, the Menacer light gun, the Sega Activator, which is possibly the worst game controller of all time, the Mega Answer, which turns the Mega Drive into a home banking system, not to mention the Mega Net and Sega Channel cartridge. Go beyond peripherals and you will find add-ons such as the Mega CD and the 32X, plus all their revised versions, including the Mega CD karaoke device. They were also still making games for the Mega Drive, Master System, Nomad, and Pico, all while being in the process of creating the Saturn and developing games for that too. If you were wondering why Sega didn't seem to focus on making quality first-party games, this is probably why. If you were also wondering why third-party developers bailed on Sega's complex, convoluted architecture, this likely addresses that as well. Perhaps they should have focused on making one thing well rather than making a dozen things poorly. What do I know? Number 2. Failing Sonic. I would like to apologise to the wonderful Sonic social media team in advance for this. It's not your fault, but Sonic the Hedgehog, on average, may be the worst franchise ever. By that I mean that no other franchise has had as many bad games in contrast to how few good ones there are. For what is one of the world's most recognisable game characters, that's not good going. It may just be that the bad ones are so bad that they overshadow, not that one, the good games, or maybe it's that most of the good games after Sonic CD were on portables and home consoles got the drivel. Whatever the case, I don't think too many series would be continuing if they had the run of bad form that Sonic has had. The years of 2005 to 2015 have to be the worst for the Blue Blur. They were so bad, in fact, that Sega even contacted the devs of a fan game to try and get the series back on track, and what a marvellous job they did. Let's at least hope for a serviceable future and not more of Sonic Boom. Number 1. Sega and Sony, and Sega and Microsoft. Nintendo did it and Sega did it. For some reason, video game companies in the 90s led Sony on, only to let them down. It was like a rite of passage. Sega and Sony explored a joint console venture, but it wasn't to be. According to Sega, Sony was a skater boy, so they said, "See you later, boy." Sony wasn't good enough for them. Alright, that wasn't exactly the reason, more just that Sega's Japan branch didn't believe Sony was serious about console hardware. Of course, Sony went on to create the PlayStation and leave both Sega and Nintendo behind, so all of this indecisiveness was good news for one of the companies involved, at least. Shockingly, Sega rejected another major partnership down the line, this time with Microsoft. Sega representatives met with Bill Gates to arrange a deal to get the upcoming Dreamcast library on the original Xbox. It was a move that could have made the Dreamcast in some way profitable, but alas, Sega pulled out because Microsoft didn't want to include the Dreamcast's online features. Clearly, it was better to let the console's library die than to allow it to live on without one very specific feature that nobody used anyway. Oh dear.